I never imagined the end of my marriage would begin with a whisper behind a half-closed door. A quiet, careless whisper, spoken by the woman who once said she'd die for me. I stood there, frozen, hearing my wife laugh softly as she told her assistant, her favorite assistant, that I should learn my place. That I should apologize to him for embarrassing him in front of her team. Apologize, to the man who had been lingering too close to her for months. Apologize, when it should have been her explaining why their messages grew too sweet, too familiar, too late at night. My hands shook, but not from anger. From the realization that somewhere along the way, I had stopped being her partner, and become her shadow. Something convenient to blame. Something easy to belittle. I stepped back, feeling the cold marble floor under my feet like it was the edge of a cliff. Funny. Marriage is supposed to be warm. But in that moment, all I felt was winter. And as her laughter continued, bright, cruel, dismissive, something inside me cracked open. Not the loud kind of break. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't heal the same way. So I walked out. I drafted the divorce papers. And I left them on her desk before she even realized I was there. But fate wasn't done with me yet. Because the assistant she defended so fiercely had a secret, one that would unravel everything she thought she controlled. It was a Tuesday soaked in rain, the kind that fell sideways, stinging the skin like tiny reminders that the world could be cold without warning. The sky was the color of wet concrete, heavy and swollen, like it was grieving something it didn't know how to name. I remember tightening my coat as I hurried toward the little cafe on the corner, the one with the chipped windows and the dim yellow lights that made everything inside look warmer than real life. I pushed open the door, the bell chiming weakly above me, and found a small table near the window. I wiped droplets from my glasses with the edge of my sleeve and breathed into my cold hands. The world outside blurred into a watercolor of umbrellas, headlights, and unspoken sorrows. Then she appeared. She rushed under the cafe awning first, a streak of movement, breathless, urgent, before stepping inside. Her hair clung to her cheeks in wet, delicate strands, like brushstrokes an artist didn't have time to finish. She shook off the rain with a soft laugh, the kind that sounded like she already knew she belonged anywhere she entered. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her smile wasn't directed at anyone in particular, it was simply released into the world, confident that someone, somewhere, would catch it. But somehow it landed squarely on me. I lowered my gaze like it burned. She scanned the cafe, the crowded tables, the dripping coats, the fogged windows, and her eyes finally paused on mine. Not because she saw me, but because my table was the only one with an empty chair. "Excuse me," she said, walking closer, "may I sit here? Everything else is taken." Her voice was soft, but steady. A voice that didn't ask for permission often, and wasn't used to being refused. I nodded too quickly. Of course. She slid into the seat across from me, and for a moment, the scent of rain and something floral, something elegant, drifted across the table and settled between us. She brushed her hair behind her ear, revealing a small silver earring shaped like a falling star. I wondered if she bought it for herself or if someone else had given it to her. I shouldn't have wondered. Not so soon. A barista approached to take her order. She smiled again, this time at him, and even he stumbled a little over his words. She ordered a cappuccino with extra foam. Her nails tapped lightly on the table, an absent rhythm that somehow synced with the sound of my pulse. "This weather," she sighed, watching the rain streak down the window. "It feels like a dramatic ending scene from a novel." I laughed softly. More like the beginning of one. She tilted her head, amused. "Do you talk like that often?" "Only on rainy days," I said, though the truth was I rarely spoke to strangers at all. She introduced herself. Her name rolled off her tongue like something expensive. I told her mine, and she repeated it with surprising gentleness, as though testing how it sounded woven into her space. Our drinks arrived. Mine tasted the way it always did, warm, bitter, familiar. Hers was topped with airy foam like a small, temporary cloud. She dipped her spoon into it and smiled when it stuck to her lip for a moment. Small things. Tiny, insignificant things. But those are the ones that carve themselves deepest. We talked, not about anything monumental, but the kinds of things people share when they're not trying to impress each other. She told me she loved the sound of pages turning, the smell of bookstores, the way certain perfumes lingered on winter scarves. I told her about the books I collected but rarely finished, and how some coffees tasted like burnt apologies, bitter from the start but somehow comforting. She laughed then. God, I remember that laugh. It was sharp, bright, and unexpected, like a bell echoing in an empty hall. I felt it ripple across the table and settle somewhere inside my chest where warmth had grown rare. When she laughed at something I said, I felt it like a reward I hadn't earned. That should have been my warning. Love should never feel like a prize you have to win. I told her I liked rainy days because they gave people excuses to slow down. She said she liked them because they made the world honest. No one pretends they're okay when they're soaking wet. She spoke like someone who had lived too fast for too long. We talked while the storm raged. She was the kind of person who filled silence effortlessly, not with noise but with presence. Her eyes held storms and promises. I thought the storm was passion. I thought the promise was devotion. I mistook both for beauty. As time passed, the cafe emptied. People disappeared into the evening, leaving damp footprints behind them. But she stayed. We drifted into a conversation about childhood, hers filled with ambition, mine filled with quiet corners and secondhand toys. She laughed at her own boldness, but never once apologized for it. She never apologized for anything, I would later learn. When the rain finally began to lighten, she glanced outside and sighed. I should go, she murmured, gathering her bag. But, this was unexpectedly nice. Unexpectedly. Such a small word, but it landed heavily. She pulled a napkin toward her, smoothing it carefully with her fingers. Then she wrote something across it with the pen she pulled from her coat. Not hurriedly, deliberately, with the kind of writing that curved confidently, like she'd signed many things that mattered. She slid the napkin toward me. A number. Her name beneath it. In case you want company again, she said, the way someone offers an umbrella to a stranger caught in a storm. I nodded, too embarrassed by the rush of warmth that flooded me. Company. I didn't realize then how easily someone could weaponize that word. She stood and adjusted her coat. Her fingertips brushed the table, and for a heartbeat, I imagined reaching out and catching her hand. But I didn't. I sat still as she stepped outside, lifting her face toward the now gentle rain like it belonged to her. The door closed behind her. The bell chimed again. And she was gone. But the warmth she left behind stayed like an afterimage, something you see even when you close your eyes. I looked down at the napkin. The ink shimmered slightly from the humidity. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my wallet. I kept that napkin for years. A silly relic. A fragile symbol of the moment I let someone powerful enough to destroy me walk right into my life without hesitation. It's strange, looking back. Every red flag was already there, like warning banners lifting gently in a storm I pretended was just wind. The way she loved being admired. The way she occupied spaces effortlessly. The way she assumed I'd share my table, my time, my attention. But I was young. And lonely. And she was dazzling in all the ways that make sensible men reckless. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder. Did she see the imbalance that early? Did she see how quickly I bent toward her warmth? Did she choose me precisely because of it? Those answers don't matter anymore. But the memory of that Tuesday lingers like a ghost, a quiet, bittersweet reminder that some storms don't ruin you all at once. They start with a smile. A napkin. A moment. And by the time you realize the sky is grieving, you're already standing in the rain. Loving her felt like standing too close to a fire, warm enough to melt the frost I carried from years of loneliness, but hot enough to scorch the edges of my common sense. She glowed in ways that made people lean in. I leaned in too far. Too willingly. And she noticed that, the same way a flame notices dry kindling. In the beginning, she basked in my devotion with a kind of gentle triumph, like my adoration proved something about her worth. She liked being admired, not silently, but visibly. She liked watching people watch her being loved. And I didn't mind giving everything she asked for. Not at first. I didn't realize that giving everything would eventually mean giving up myself. She often invited me to her industry events, not because she missed me, but because I looked good standing behind her, hands folded, smiling politely like the stable, dependable husband-shaped accessory she claimed me to be. This is my partner, she'd tell people, her voice lilting. The stable one. The one who keeps me grounded. Stable. It sounded like a compliment, but the way she said it felt like she was introducing a reliable piece of furniture. A polished wooden chair. A solid bookshelf. Something sturdy she could lean against without fear of collapse. People admired her brilliance, her humor, her effortless charm. Then they'd look at me and admire her again, because even her choice in partners spoke of her taste. I pretended it was affection. But deep down, I sensed the truth. She liked how devoted I looked beside her. She liked how it made her shine brighter. At home, everything felt different. Softer. Quieter. She would curl into me at the end of long nights, her head on my chest, her fingers tracing absent shapes across my ribs. Those were the moments that disarmed me most. She'd whisper dreams into my skin, how she wanted to reach higher, go further, become someone unforgettable. "You make me feel safe," she said once, voice muffled by the blanket. I stroked her hair gently, believing her. Believing that she needed me. But she wasn't fragile. She never had been. She was brilliant, restless, ambitious, and hungry in a way that had nothing to do with love. I was the constant. The anchor. The one she assumed would stay no matter how many storms she stirred up in her pursuit of more. My own ambitions dimmed quietly beside her rising sun. Not because she asked me to give them up, but because it was easier to let my world shrink than to risk losing her. She never noticed the slow decline, or maybe she did but found it convenient. A partner without dreams of his own would never outgrow her orbit. I remember one night in particular, a winter evening when snow whispered against our windows like soft secrets. She sat at the dining table with her laptop open, eyes blazing with focus. I sat on the couch behind her, sketching ideas for a project I hadn't told her about yet. I was proud of it. Hopeful. Ready to share. But before I could speak, she sighed dramatically and said, "God, it's exhausting being the one who carries everything." She didn't look back to see the way my hand stilled on the paper. Somewhere inside me, something small folded in on itself. And still, I stayed silent. Because loving her felt like a duty I assigned myself long before she stopped deserving it. Then she hired him. The assistant. Young. Eager. Bright in that unweathered way people are before the world teaches them about consequences. He shadowed her like a loyal moon orbiting a sun. He carried her folders, passed her water during interviews, anticipated her needs before she voiced them. She praised him often, too often, calling him indispensable, a rare find, a breath of fresh air. I told myself it was professional admiration. I forced myself to believe it. But I couldn't ignore the subtle shift in her eyes whenever he entered a room. Not affection. Not confusion. Ownership. As though she liked having someone who looked at her the way I once did, with fresh awe, unspoiled by history or disappointment. One evening, I arrived at her office with her favorite takeout, a small gesture, but one I used to enjoy making. I found her at her desk, leaning closer to her assistant than necessary, discussing something on his tablet. They looked up when they heard me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're here." Just that. As if my presence had disrupted a rhythm she preferred. Her assistant stood quickly, smoothing his shirt. "I'll give you two space." He slipped out, but the echo of their closeness lingered in the air like perfume. "You didn't need to come," she said, closing the laptop. "I wanted to," I murmured, placing the food on her desk. She sighed. "You don't always have to show up, you know. I'm not a child." I wanted to ask why she looked at her assistant like he was. But I bit back the words, choosing silence again, the easiest, most familiar cage. Over the weeks that followed, the distance between us grew in ways I didn't know how to name. She worked later. Smiled at her phone more often. Brushed off my concerns with breezy excuses. I tried to hold on to the parts of her that once felt tender, but they slipped through my fingers like sand. It wasn't infidelity, not yet. What hurt was the shift. The quiet abandonment. The emotional erasure. I felt it every time she walked past me without looking up from her screen. Every time she laughed at a message she wouldn't show me. Every time she fell asleep facing away instead of curled into my chest. Our home began to feel like a carefully curated museum, beautifully arranged, but distant. There were framed photos of us on the walls, smiling versions of ourselves that no longer existed. There were candles on the shelves she never lit, gifts I gave her that remained unopened, letters I wrote and tucked into books she never touched. One night, I found one of my old letters under a stack of fashion magazines. I had written it months earlier, a simple note telling her I believed in her, that I admired her. She had underlined one sentence in red ink. "You're the best part of my life." But she hadn't underlined it for affection. Next to it, she had scribbled a tiny note. "Too clingy. Tone it down." I stared at those words for a long time, feeling something cold and heavy settle inside me. And still, I stayed. Still, I convinced myself that love required endurance. Still, I let her world swallow mine whole. If I had walked away then, when the signs were small, when the damage was still reversible, maybe I would have avoided the ruin that followed. Maybe my heart would have cracked instead of shattering. Maybe I would have learned to choose myself earlier. But I didn't leave. I stayed as her ambition sharpened. I stayed as her assistant grew more important to her days than I was. I stayed as her praise for him became more frequent than her conversations with me. I let the cage grow around me, one golden bar at a time. And the cruelest part? I didn't even realize I was locking myself inside it. Not until much later, when the door slammed shut. The night of her company's anniversary gala felt like stepping into a glass palace, beautiful, sharp, and full of reflections I didn't want to see. Chandeliers glittered above us like frozen constellations. Violins swept through the air in slow, elegant waves. Photographers circled the room, capturing every smile, every gown, every moment meant to be immortalized in press releases and corporate memory. She was the brightest thing in the room. My wife. My son. Her gown shimmered in silver, catching every shard of light, making her look untouchable. People gravitated to her like she was gravity itself. I stood at her side, the loyal statue with a gentle smile, the prop husband who blended perfectly into the background so she could shine unobstructed. I didn't mind it. Not at first. I told myself I was proud. That this night was hers. That my role was to be invisible. But her assistant didn't think so. He hovered dangerously close behind her, leaning in when she spoke, anticipating her gestures, her breath, her whispers. His presence was like static, faint but constant, clinging to her even when she stepped forward into spotlights. And that night, she let him stay close. Close enough for everyone to notice. Close enough for me to feel a coldness blooming under my ribs. When the CEO stepped onto the stage to toast her, I felt her fingers brush against mine. For a moment, I thought she was reaching for me, some hopeful instinct tugged inside my chest. But then her touch slipped away and landed somewhere else. On him. Softly. Casually. As though it were the most natural thing in the world. A tiny gesture. A small betrayal. But in a room filled with eyes, it became enormous. I saw the flicker of surprise in her colleagues. The forced smiles. The quick, awkward glances toward me. The assistant's faint smirk, the kind that only grows in the shadow of someone else's humiliation. And still, I stood still. Still the loyal statue. Still pretending the cold didn't sting. The CEO continued, praising her achievements, her tireless work ethic, her leadership, her meteoric rise. Every word was true. Every word reminded me of how far apart our worlds had grown. Then the award presenter took the stage. A man known for his humor. A man who liked being bold. A man who didn't care where his jokes landed. And of course, he said with a wink, let's not forget her husband, the lucky man who gets to ride her coattails. The crowd laughed. A wave of polite amusement. A ripple of chuckles. Even she laughed. Not a small laugh. A bright, warm laugh that struck me harder than any insult could. My chest tightened. Something inside me, something fragile and previously unbroken, folded in on itself like paper catching flame. When the laughter faded, I could still feel the heat of their eyes on me. A mix of pity and superiority. The look people give a man who doesn't realize has been left behind. I swallowed everything, the shame, the anger, the hollow ache. I waited until the ceremony ended. Until the last applause faded. Until the crowd scattered into smaller circles of gossip and praise. Then I approached her. Quietly. Carefully. Like one approaches a glass sculpture already threaded with cracks. Why did you let them say that? I asked, my voice low. Why did you laugh? She didn't look up from her champagne. You're too sensitive, she replied. It was just a joke. A joke at my expense. She rolled her eyes, as if my feelings were an inconvenience. He didn't mean anything by it. Don't make this bigger than it is. Before I could respond, the assistant reappeared, smooth, polished, wearing a grin that made my skin tighten. You did look a little stiff on stage, he said lightly. It was kind of funny. I turned to her, waiting, praying, for her to say something. Anything. A defense. A correction. A glimmer of loyalty. But she didn't defend me. She defended him. Oh, relax, she laughed, brushing his arm. He's joking. And in that moment, surrounded by glittering lights and people who adored her, I realized something painful and undeniable. I was no longer her partner. I was her prop. Something she displayed when convenient. Something she tucked behind her when it didn't fit the picture she wanted to create. We stood in silence for a moment, the three of us. But somehow, I felt like the one who shouldn't have been there, the extra piece, the outdated accessory, the man who no longer complimented her image. I excused myself before the humiliation could deepen, before the burning behind my ribs could spill out of my eyes. I stepped out into the cold balcony, where the city lights sprawled beneath the night sky like scattered gold. The wind stung against my cheeks. I wasn't sure if the cold or the hurt felt sharper. I leaned over the railing, taking slow breaths, watching my breath fog into the air like ghosts of words I'd never said. I thought about the early days, the warm mornings, the gentle smiles, the nights she curled into me like I was home. I thought about how far we had drifted. And yet, some part of me still believed we could return. Some foolish, hopeful part remained tethered to the memory of who she used to be. When I returned inside, she was already surrounded again, laughing, radiant, untouchable. She didn't see me approach. She didn't notice the long stretch of absence. She didn't reach for me once. Still, I tried to salvage what was left. "Can we talk tonight?" I asked quietly when the crowd thinned enough for her to hear me. She sighed. "Not tonight. I'm exhausted." Her assistant hovered beside her, pretending not to listen. "Tomorrow?" I whispered. "We'll see." Her tone made it clear. I was a burden. An afterthought. Something to be scheduled, if time permitted. We drove home in silence. Her phone buzzed. She laughed softly at a message. I didn't ask who it was from. At home, she headed straight to her office, saying she had emails to answer. I stood in the hallway, watching the light beneath her door. The same door she later walked behind to mock me. The same door I would eventually stand outside of when my marriage finally snapped. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, I simply waited for her. Sitting on the couch. Staring at the wall. Feeling the seam in my heart tear a little more. I didn't know a bigger humiliation was waiting for me. One that would make this moment feel small. One that would tear the final thread holding us together. If I had known, maybe I would have walked away then. Before the next wound. Before the final break. But love makes fools of us all. And I was the biggest fool of them. It was supposed to be a small gesture. A quiet attempt at mending something cracked but not yet shattered. Lunch, nothing more than lunch. A simple reminder that we still had a rhythm, a life, a marriage worth catching before it slipped entirely from our hands. I arrived at her office building just before noon, the winter air crisp enough to sting my cheeks. A soft snow was falling, the kind that drifts lazily, like it hasn't decided whether to commit to the ground or vanish midair. I carried her favorite pastry in a small paper bag, a subtle peace offering, though I didn't want to call it that. The lobby was warm, filled with muted chatter and the hum of productivity. I rode the elevator up, watching my blurred reflection in the silver doors. My tie was slightly crooked. I fixed it. My eyes looked tired. I couldn't fix that. When the doors opened on her floor, I stepped out, rehearsing something light to say. Something gentle. Something that didn't carry the hurt from the gala. But before I reached her office, I heard her voice. Not the warm tone she once used when speaking to me. Not the soft, private voice from our early mornings. This voice was sharp. Brisk. Dismissive. And it was saying my name. I froze in the hallway. Her conference door was half open, a sliver of sound spilling into the corridor. And like a fool, I leaned closer. Inside, her assistant's voice rose, tinged with annoyance. "He embarrassed you." A pause. Then her laugh. That crystalline laugh that used to melt me, the one she once reserved for moments shared under blankets or whispered across pillows. Now she gave it to him. "He's insecure," she said lightly. "I told him to apologize to you." My pulse stumbled. I felt suddenly unsteady, like the carpet had become too soft beneath my shoes. Apologize, to him? For what? For standing beside my wife? For existing? The assistant chuckled, amused, flattered. "Shouldn't he be grateful you even brought him to the gala?" Grateful. The word punched the air from my lungs. And her response. God, I still hear it sometimes in the quietest corners of my mind. He should apologize. He needs to understand his place. It's embarrassing when a spouse drags you down. Place. Spouse. Drag you down. Each word carved me open with surgical precision. It wasn't just the cruelty. It was the ease. The practiced nature of it. As if she'd been telling this story, this version of me, to herself long before she said it aloud. As if she had rewritten our history in her mind, turning me from partner into liability, from love into weight. Their voices tangled again in soft laughter. Intimate. Quiet. A kind of closeness we hadn't shared in years. I stepped back from the door, my heartbeat muffled like it was sinking underwater. My ears rang. My palms felt damp. I didn't recognize the sensation at first, this strange, cold mixture of disbelief and clarity. I had never been paranoid. Never jealous. Never insecure by nature. But hearing her voice like that, hearing her diminish me so effortlessly, felt like watching the home we built together collapse in slow motion. A memory rose unbidden. Her head on my chest years ago, whispering that she couldn't imagine life without me. Her fingers curled around mine as she cried over her first workplace failure, telling me I was her safe place. Her hands framing my face on our wedding day, eyes shining with something real. Had she meant any of it? Or had I only believed she did? I backed away from the conference room, careful not to make a sound. I didn't want her to hear me. I didn't want her to stop talking. I needed the truth, even if it was a knife. When I reached the elevator, I pressed the button and stood there trembling. Trembling from shame. From humiliation. From the sudden understanding that the woman I loved was no longer standing on the same side of the divide as me. The elevator doors opened, but I didn't step inside. I turned and walked down the stairs instead, needing the physical burn in my legs to pull me out of my spiraling thoughts. Outside, the snow had thickened. Fat flakes drifted from the sky like falling petals, landing on my coat sleeves and melting instantly. Each flake felt like a tiny sting, reminders of all the times I had shielded her dreams while letting mine freeze over. I walked without direction until I found a small cafe tucked beneath a row of bare trees. The windows fogged from the warmth inside, blurring the silhouettes of people laughing, talking, living lives that didn't ache. I stepped in. The bell chimed softly, the same fragile chime from the day we met. A painful echo. I sat near the window, the snow outside making the world look gentle and unreal. I didn't order anything. My hands were shaking too badly to hold a cup. Instead, I pulled my laptop from my bag. Opened it. Hovered over an empty document for a moment. Then I typed her name. Typed mine. Typed the words I never thought I'd have the strength to follow through with. Petition for divorce. The cursor blinked in stark rhythm, like a heartbeat announcing the end. I filled out every field. Every line. Every legal term that felt like a tombstone for the version of me who had been willing to bleed for her. It didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet. Inevitable. Like the moment before a candle goes out, when the flame flickers once in surrender, then disappears. When I finished, I sat back and looked at the screen. The snow outside had stopped. The world was still. A part of me waited for regret to rush in. For panic. For grief. But all I felt was a strange, deep calm. The kind that comes when you finally stop holding your breath after years of drowning. I closed the laptop gently, as if sealing a chapter. And for once, for the first time in our marriage, she would learn what it felt like to lose something she believed would never leave. I stood and left the cafe. The world felt just a little bit lighter. But as I walked away, a soft wind brushed against me, carrying a whisper I didn't want to acknowledge. It wasn't over yet. The real break was still coming. A truth she would force into the open. A truth that would unravel everything I thought I understood. There's something strange about heartbreak, something no one warns you about. People talk about the pain, the sleepless nights, the heavy silence that crawls into your bones. But they never talk about the clarity. The way the world sharpens once the person who blurred your vision finally steps out of the frame. After I filed for divorce, it felt like someone had wiped a fogged mirror clean. I started seeing things I had ignored for years, strange patterns, small inconsistencies, looks exchanged between her and her assistant, little behaviors I once dismissed as exhaustion or stress. Everything made a different kind of sense now. A painful sense. But clarity, nonetheless. 2 days after filing, I received a text from an unknown number. Short. Tense. We need to talk. Before this gets messy. Messy. That one word told me more than the message itself. Still, I agreed to meet him. We chose a diner on the outskirts of the city. A quiet place with dim lights and the low hum of old jazz drifting from an overhead speaker. It felt like the kind of place where truths went to hide, or finally unravel. When I arrived, he was already seated in a booth near the window. His knee bounced rapidly under the table, and his fingers drummed against a glass of water he hadn't touched. He looked younger in this lighting. Smaller. Not the confident shadow I had seen hovering near my wife at the gala. He stood quickly when he saw me. "Thanks for coming," he said, voice strained. I sat across from him. "You said it was important." He swallowed. "I just don't want you to misunderstand anything." He said the word misunderstand with too much emphasis. And far too much fear. I didn't respond. I simply watched him. Nothing happened, he continued, hands twisting together. Between me and your wife, I mean. People talk, but it's not like that. You know how rumors start. I raised an eyebrow. I never mentioned rumors. His face stiffened. And I'm not having an affair with her, he added quickly. We're just close. Professionally. You shouldn't think. He repeated himself. Again. And again. 3 times in the first 5 minutes. That alone told me he was hiding something. A waitress approached to take our order. He waved her off impatiently. I asked for coffee, mostly to buy time. My heart was steady, strangely so. No panic. No dread. Just curiosity. When the waitress left, he leaned forward. I reached out because she's not taking the divorce well. A humorless laugh escaped me. I'm sure she isn't. She said you acted irrationally, he muttered. She said you'd calm down eventually. Calm down. As if my heartbreak was a tantrum. As if my dignity was overreaction. For a moment, I wanted to leave. But then he slipped. Just enough. He mentioned something very specific, a detail only someone intimately close to her would know. A habit she had in the mornings. Something she only did when she felt comfortable. Something she'd once shared with me in the soft glow of early dawn. I stared at him. How would you know that? His jaw clenched. She told me. She told you, or you witnessed it? He froze. Just a second. Just long enough for the truth to flicker across his eyes. I leaned back. Are you sleeping with my wife? He blanched. Not red. Not embarrassed. White. Drained. As if the question hit a place he wasn't prepared to face. No, he whispered. No. It's not like that. He stopped, swallowing hard. You're asking the wrong question. My pulse slowed. Then what's the right one? He looked around the diner, as if expecting her to walk through the door and drag him out by the collar. His voice dropped to a trembling whisper. The question you should ask is why she wanted you to think something was happening. My stomach tightened. Explain. He closed his eyes, exhaled shakily, then opened them again, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked sincerely afraid. She used me, he said. Not like that. Not physically. But she used me to get reactions out of you. I stared at him. She told me to message her late sometimes so you'd see the notifications, he continued. She told me to laugh around her when you entered a room. She asked me to accidentally mention things you wouldn't like, just to see how you'd respond. Images flashed through my mind, the late-night texts, the hushed whispers, the quick glances that always felt off. They fit together now like jagged pieces of a twisted puzzle. Why? I asked, though a part of me already knew. She wanted to test you, he said. She wanted to see if you'd fight for her. If you'd get jealous. His hands shook. She said it was exciting. That it made her feel wanted. My throat tightened. She made you send those messages? Yes. And the gala? That moment on stage? He nodded. She predicted you'd get upset. She bet you wouldn't confront her until later. She said you were predictable. Safe. Steady. The anchor. My hands curled around the edge of the table. Was she ever unfaithful to me? His eyes softened, with something like pity. No, he said quietly. But she was cruel. And she didn't care. The truth settled in me like ash. She had broken me, not with betrayal of the body, but betrayal of intention. Of love. Of respect. Then he whispered the words that ended it all. She told me you'd never leave, he said. She said you were the safest anchor she had. Anchor. Not husband. Not partner. A weight. A certainty. A tool. Something reliable enough to be disregarded. Something that existed to keep her from drifting too far, while she chased every horizon except the one we had once shared. I sat there, staring at the table, feeling the last shard of love dissolve, not violently, but quietly. Like something that had simply reached its natural end. For a moment, we both sat in silence. The waitress returned with my coffee. I wrapped my hands around it, feeling its warmth seep into fingers that had gone cold. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he murmured. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I nodded slowly. I know. And I did know. He wasn't innocent, but he wasn't the architect. He was a pawn in a game I never agreed to play. I stood, leaving a few bills on the table. Take care of yourself, I said quietly. He looked up, startled. "You're not angry?" "I'm done being angry," I said. And I meant it. As I stepped outside, the winter air wrapped around me. Crisp. Clear. Bracing. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar bloom inside my chest. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Not the aching sadness of a man trying to hold together a sinking marriage. Something else. Something lighter. Steady. Alive. Freedom. I walked down the street, the cold wind brushing against my skin like a promise, soft, honest, and long overdue. And for the first time, I didn't look back. People say strange about heartbreak, maybe for no one warns you about. But for me, talk about the pain, the sleepless nights, the morning after I filed, the heavy silence that crawls into your bones. But they never talk about the clarity. No phantom tension in the world sharpens. No waiting person who blurred your vision finally steps out of the frame. The tone of her voice. After I filed for divorce, it felt like someone had wiped a fog mirror clean. I slept. I started seeing things I had ignored for years. The kind of sleep that makes you remember your body is human and not just a container for stress. Between her and her assistant. I cooked breakfast without checking my phone for her demanding messages or stress. I played everything made a different kind of sense before we married. A painful soft acoustic songs that used to make me feel grounded. Nonetheless, my reflection in the kitchen window looked unfamiliar. A text from an unknown number, not broken, short, just tense. Waking up. We need to talk. For the first time, before I remembered there was a version of me before her shadow stretched across my life. That one word told me more than the message itself. A version that dreamed. I agreed to meet him. A version that didn't hold his breath every time his partner entered the room. A quiet place with dim lights and the low hum of old jazz like a forgotten photograph pulled from the back of a drawer. It felt like the kind of place where truths went to hide, and I was ready to meet him again. When I applied for a job a friend had recommended months ago, near the window. Something I ignored at the time because the hours were inconvenient for his fingers drummed against a glass of water he applied without hesitation. He looked younger in this lighting. The interview was quiet, smaller. Professional. Not the confident shadow I had seen hovering near my wife at the gala. They called it a strength. Quickly when he saw me. The same trait she once mocked as boring, he said, predictable, voice strained, dull. When they offered me the position, you said it was something inside me loosen. He swallowed. Joy. I just don't want you to misunderstand anything. Permission. He said the word misunderstand with too much emphasis. My wardrobe changed next, and far too much fear, but subtly. I didn't respond. Better fabrics, I simply colors that suited me, nothing happened. Preferences. He continued, clothes that made me feel like a man stepping between forward, me and your wife, shrinking backward. People noticed, but it's not like that. An old classmate reached out, you know how rumors saying I looked lighter. I raised an eyebrow. A coworker invited me to never mentioned rumors. Even strangers treated me differently, and I'm not having an affair with something visible, he added quickly, like a change in posture or the softening of the eyes. Professionally, my world, you shouldn't think, once so small and cramped, he repeated himself, began to expand again, slowly, and again, beautifully. 3 times in the first 5 minutes, and while mine grew, hers that alone told me he was hiding something. I didn't seek out a waitress approach to take, but it has a way of slipping through. He waved her off impatiently. Her team had started whispering, mostly to someone had leaked audio of my heart was steady at the office. Strangely so, not the conference room conversation, another one. Just one I hadn't known existed. When the waitress left, a moment she probably didn't even remember because I reached out because too easily she's not taking the divorce well. Her PR image, a humorless laugh, immaculate persona I'm sure she is building, started to fracture. She said you acted irrationally. Comments online shifted from admiration to discomfort. She said you'd calm down eventually. Her company released a stiff statement about as if my heartbreak was a tantrum. But the most surprising thing was the overreaction. For a moment, I wanted to leave. But then he left a note on her desk, just enough. Clip. He mentioned something very specific. I thought I was important only someone intimately close to her would know. A habit she had in the apologizing to me. Something she was waking up when she felt comfortable. Her world, something she once shared with me in the soft glow of began to tilt, and she had nothing steady to hold on to. How would you know that? Except his jaw clenched. The one anchor she had always assumed would never drift away. She told you, or you witnessed it. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Just a quiet rain tapped against my windows, for the truth to flicker across his eyes. Would met under, I leaned but a gentle drizzle, are you like sleeping with my wife? Instead of crying. He blanched. I had just finished dinner when the doorbell rang. Not embarrassed. I opened it, and there she was. Drained. Head as if the question hit a place he wasn't prepared to face. Hands trembling, not from the cold, he whispered, but from something rawer. It's not like that. Smaller. She, not physically, stopped, but emotionally hard. The way someone looks when they finally realize they are not invincible. Then what's the right one? You didn't even fight for us. He looked around the diner, voice breaking between syllables. To walk through the door and drag him out by the collar. I didn't move. His voice dropped to a trembling whisper. Really look. The question you should ask is why she wanted the ruins of her own thing was happening. She took a step closer. My stomach tightened. You just walked away. Explain. Like none of it mattered. He closed his eyes, exhaled shakily, I said, then opened them again. Every piece of it mattered. Time since I'd met him, that's why he looked sincerely afraid. Her lip trembled. She used me. Then why didn't you fight? Not Not like that.
And there it was.
Not
the
physically.
question she had been holding
but she
like
used
a shield,
me to get reactions
something
out
she
of you.
believed would prove she was the
I
victim,
stared at him,
not the architect.
She told
of the
me to
destruction.
message her late
I
sometime so
exhaled
you'd see
slowly.
the notifications.
I did fight.
He continued.
4 years.
She told me to
You
laugh
just never
around her
saw
when
it.
you entered a room.
She flinched
She
as
asked
though
me
I
to
had struck her.
accidentally mention
I
things you
continued,
wouldn't like,
voice
just
calm,
to see how
steady.
you'd respond. The steadiness she once
Images
adored
flashed
then
through my
despised.
mind.
The late
I
night
fought
texts,
every time I
the hushed
stayed
whispers,
silent instead
the
of
quick
arguing.
glances that always
Every
felt
time
off.
I let you shine
They
while
fit
dimming
together
myself.
now like jagged
Every
pieces
time
of a
I
twisted
forgave
puzzle.
what you didn't even
Why?
notice you'd done.
I asked,
Every time
though
I
a part of
swallowed
me
hurt
already
so you
knew.
wouldn't feel inconvenienced.
She wanted to test you, he
her
said.
eyes filled again.
She wanted
but
to
I
see
didn't
if you'd
reach out
fight
to
for
wipe
her.
her tears.
If you'd get jealous.
That version of me was gone.
His hands shook.
I fought.
She
I
said
said
it was exciting.
right up until you made
that
it
it made
clear
her
I
feel
was the only
wanted.
one fighting. My throat tightened.
She shook her head.
She
Tears
made you
slipping
send those
down her
messages?
cheeks.
I didn't
Yes.
mean. And the
You
gala?
did.
I said
That
gently.
moment on stage.
And it's okay.
He
You
nodded.
don't have to pretend
She
anymore.
predicted you'd get upset.
The rain behind
She
her
bet you
deepened,
wouldn't confront
misting
her
the
until
porch in a
later.
silver haze.
She said you were
She looked
predictable.
over her shoulder,
Safe.
as if expecting
Safe.
someone else to appear.
Steady.
No
The
one
anchor.
did.
Her
My
shoulders
hands
sagged.
curled around the edge of
You
the
really
table.
won't come back.
Was she ever
asked.
unfaithful to me?
There was no malice in
His
her
eyes
voice
softened,
now,
with
only
something like
disbelief.
pity. Because
No,
in her
he
world,
said quietly,
people didn't leave
but
her.
she was cruel.
They revolved
and
around
she didn't
her.
care.
But I had stopped.
The truth
orbiting.
settled in me like
no,
ash.
I said
She
softly.
had broken me,
I
not
won't.
with betrayal of the body,
Her face
but
crumpled,
betrayal of
not
intention,
from heartbreak,
of love,
not from
of
losing
respect,
but from
then
losing
he whispered
her
the words that ended it all.
Her most loyal admirer.
She told me you'd never
her
leave,
safest
he
anchor.
said.
She
She
said
said
you
you
were
were
the
the
safest
porch,
anchor she
rain
had.
beginning to cling to her
Anchor.
hair.
I
Not
didn't
husband.
invite her in.
Not partner.
I didn't close the
A weight.
distance.
A
I
certainty.
didn't rescue her from
A
the
tool.
cold.
That
Something
was no
reliable
longer my
enough to
role.
be disregarded.
Goodbye, she
Something
whispered.
that existed to
Goodbye,
keep her from
I
drifting too
replied.
far.
She
While she
turned
chased
and
every
walked into the
horizon
rain,
except the
her
one we
silhouette
had once
dimming
shared.
with each step until
I
she
sat
disappeared
there, staring
completely
at
into
the table,
mist.
feeling the
And
last
as the door
shard of
shut
love
gently
dissolve
behind me,
not
I felt,
violently,
but quietly,
nothing triumphant,
like something that
nothing
had simply
vengeful,
reached its natural
just
end.
the quiet justice
For a
of letting
moment,
a chapter
we both
close
sat
with
in
its truth
silence.
fully revealed.
The waitress
People
returned
think
with my
revenge
coffee.
is loud. I wrapped my
Flames,
hands around
shouts,
it, feeling its
dramatic
warmth
finales.
seep into fingers that
Mine
had gone
was
silent.
cold.
He
A life
cleared his
rebuilt.
throat.
A
I'm
self
sorry,
rediscovered.
he murmured. A
I
dignity
didn't
reclaimed.
mean for it to go this
And
far.
in the end, she had
I
to live
nodded
with
slowly.
the truth.
I
The
know.
man she thought would never
And I
leave.
did know.
He
Finally
wasn't
did.
innocent,
And he
but
never
wasn't
looked
the
back.
architect. He was a pawn in a game I never agreed to play. I stood, leaving a few bills on the table. Take care of yourself, I said quietly. He looked up, startled. You're not angry? I'm done being angry, I said. And I meant it. As I stepped outside, the winter air wrapped around me. Crisp. Clear. Bracing. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar bloom inside my chest. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Not the aching sadness of a man trying to hold together a sinking marriage. Something else. Something lighter. Steady. Alive. Freedom. I walked down the street, the cold wind brushing against my skin like a promise, soft, honest, and long overdue. And for the first time, I didn't look back.